The moment my daughter took her first breath, I thought, this is it. This is the best day of my life. I had no idea it was also about to become the worst. She was 7 pounds, 2 ounces, perfect little fingers. She grabbed my thumb before she even opened her eyes, and I fell apart in the best way possible. 19 hours of labor, and none of it mattered anymore. None of it. I looked at her face and thought, I would burn the whole world down for you. I named her Rose, and I was still holding her, still in the hospital gown, still shaking, still crying the kind of happy tears you can't control, when the door to my room opened, and a man I had never seen before walked in carrying a manila envelope. He was wearing a suit, at 5 a.m, in a delivery ward. He looked at me the way people look at a problem they've been hired to solve. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "I have some documents here that require your signature." And that is where my story really begins. My name is Emma. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, raised mostly by my grandmother after my mother decided that the life she had wasn't the one she wanted. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. It took me a long time to get there, but I'm there. My grandmother taught me how to make something out of not much, how to find beauty in ordinary things, how to work hard without expecting the world to applaud you for it. I went to community college, got a general studies degree that nobody ever asked about, and ended up working at Bev's Diner on Route 9, where I knew everyone's regular order and everyone knew my name. I was not the kind of woman men like Derek Calloway noticed, except he did. He came in on a Thursday morning, sat down at one of my tables, ordered black coffee, read something on his phone, and left a $50 bill on a $9 check. I thought he'd made a mistake. I ran out to the parking lot to catch him, and he smiled at me like I'd said something funny and told me to keep it. He came back the next Thursday, and the one after that. And somewhere around the 4th or 5th Thursday, he asked me to dinner, and I said yes, and that was that. Derek was charming in the way that certain men are charming, like it cost him nothing, like it was just the natural state of him. He was funny and attentive and full of stories. He told me he worked in finance. He never talked about his family, and I never pushed. I had learned early in life not to push people about what they didn't offer. We were married 9 months later in a courthouse. No guests on his side. He told me his family was complicated, and I said I understood. And I did. Or I thought I did. For a while it was good. A small apartment. I kept working. He traveled. We were building something, or I thought we were. When I found out I was pregnant, I cried for an hour out of pure joy. Derek held me and told me everything was going to be fine. I believed him. Looking back, I can see the cracks that were there the whole time. The phone calls he took in the other room. The business trip that stretched from 1 week to 3 with no real explanation. The way he'd sometimes look at me when he thought I wasn't watching. Not with love, but with something more like assessment. Like he was calculating something. But I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was hormonal, anxious, reading into nothing. I told myself that good men like Derek didn't have reasons to hide. Then his mother showed up. I came home one afternoon, about 5 months into the pregnancy, and there was a woman standing at my door. Cashmere coat, pearls, posture like she'd been trained to stand that way since birth. She introduced herself as Patricia Calloway and looked at me the way you look at a house you're considering buying but aren't sure is worth the price. "So you're the one he married?" she said. She stayed for less than an hour. She asked questions that sounded like small talk but weren't. Where was I from? What did my family do? What were my plans after the baby? She looked at my apartment with an expression she was too polished to let become a frown. Before she left, she paused at the door and said, I hope you understand that the Calloway name comes with responsibilities, dear. Not everyone is suited for them. I told Derek about it that night. He went quiet, not angry, not defensive, just quiet, and said, "She's always been like this. Just ignore her." But something changed after that visit. Derek was home less. When he was home, he was in his study with the door closed, looking at documents he angled away from me whenever I walked in. He started taking calls outside, in the parking lot, even in winter. 2 weeks before my due date, I found a folder on the kitchen counter. I don't know if he left it there by accident. Maybe he did. Maybe some part of him wanted me to find it. Inside was a property deed I didn't recognize, transfer documents for something called the Calloway Family Trust, and what I can only describe as a custody prearrangement for a child who hadn't been born yet. My name was nowhere on any of it. I am not a lawyer. I didn't understand every word I was reading, but I understood the dates, and I understood that this had been drawn up months ago, quietly, without my knowledge, without my name. I confronted Derek, and for the first time in 2 years of marriage, I saw who he actually was. He didn't get angry. He got cold. He told me I was misreading legal paperwork, that his mother was simply planning ahead, that the Calloway estate had interests to protect, and this was standard procedure for families like his. He told me I needed to trust him. I told him I had always trusted him. I asked him if he had ever trusted me. He didn't answer. I called my grandmother that night. I sat on the bathroom floor with the door locked and I told her everything, my voice barely above a whisper so Derek wouldn't hear. She listened to all of it without interrupting. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Baby, when a man goes quiet instead of angry, he's already made up his mind." I didn't sleep that night, or the night after that. 2 weeks later, my water broke. 19 hours of labor. Derek was there, technically. He sat in the chair by the window and checked his phone and stepped out repeatedly for calls. I focused on breathing, on the baby, on getting through. The nurse who stayed with me through the worst of it was named Marge Holloway. She was in her mid-50s, no nonsense, efficient, the kind of woman who doesn't perform warmth but simply has it. During the hardest contractions, she would squeeze my hand without saying anything, and somehow that was exactly right. At 4:47 in the morning, Rose was born. Derek kissed my forehead. He said he loved me. He said he was just stepping out for a minute. 20 minutes passed. Then the door opened, and it wasn't Derek. It was the man in the suit. Attorney Gerald Holt, he introduced himself, and standing in the hallway behind him, I could see the silhouette of Patricia Calloway in her cashmere coat. He set the manila envelope on my bedside table. He began explaining, calmly and clinically, that the papers inside included a no-contest divorce agreement and a temporary custody arrangement that would give the Calloway Family Trust what he called guardianship oversight of Rose, pending a formal hearing. My daughter was 1 hour old. She was on my chest. I was still in the hospital gown, and they wanted me to sign. I want you to really understand what I am telling you. They walked into my delivery room with papers while my daughter was 1 hour old. Patricia Calloway had planned this. She had planned it for months. She had waited for the moment when I would be most exhausted, most alone, most overwhelmed. And she sent a lawyer in to finish the job. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. I was shaking, and I didn't even know if it was fear or fury or just my body still in shock from 19 hours of labor. I looked at those papers on the table, and I felt the walls of the room closing in. And then Marge spoke. She had been standing quietly at the back of the room, updating my chart. She hadn't said a word, but she set down her clipboard and she looked at the papers, not reading them closely, just catching a glimpse of the letterhead, and something shifted in her face. "I'm going to need everyone except the patient and the baby to step outside," she said. "Right now. Hospital policy requires restricted visitation during post-delivery recovery. You can speak with the charge nurse at the desk." Holt started to object. Patricia's voice rose from the hallway. Marge walked to the door and opened it wider and said, without raising her voice at all, "Sir, this is a medical facility, not a law office. Out." And they went. When the door closed, the room went so quiet I could hear Rose breathing. Marge pulled her chair close to my bed. She took my hand, and she asked me very quietly if my husband's family was from Cedar Falls, Ohio. I blinked at her. I said I thought so. I asked her why. She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words. "Because I grew up in Cedar Falls," she said, "and I knew a family named Calloway a long time ago." She paused. Patricia Calloway had a first daughter-in-law, a sweet girl, not from money. And when that girl had her baby, Patricia spent the next 2 years building a legal case to take that child away from her. She used paperwork, she used lawyers, she used timing. Marge looked at me steadily. That girl signed something in a hospital room when she was too tired and too scared to know what she was signing, and it cost her 4 years in court. I stared at her. "I don't know how it ended," she said. "I moved away before it did." But I never forgot her face. And when I saw that name on those papers tonight, I wasn't going to let it happen twice, not on my floor. I started crying. Not the happy kind this time. Marge picked up her phone and called the hospital's patient advocate, an in-house legal liaison available at all hours. Her name was Carol. She arrived within 30 minutes, reviewed the documents, and immediately identified several problems, including the fact that the paperwork had been drawn up 6 weeks before Rose was even born, which indicated clear premeditation. Carol looked at me and said plainly, "Do not sign anything tonight. You have rights, and whoever prepared these documents is going to have a serious problem." For the first time in hours, I could breathe. Derek came back to the room and found Carol there and the documents still unsigned on the table. He looked at them. He looked at me. His jaw tightened. I looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time. I didn't scream. I had already done my crying. I just asked him one question. "How long have you been planning this?" He tried to explain. His mother had concerns about the baby's future. The Calloway estate had interests that needed protecting. The arrangement was temporary, just until things were settled. He'd been going to explain it all to me. After I signed. I asked him one more question. "Did you ever love me? Or was I just someone easy enough to fool?" He didn't answer. He stood there in the doorway of my delivery room with his mouth slightly open and nothing coming out of it. And I realized that the silence was its own answer. I told him to leave. He left. A few minutes later, Derek's younger brother Brandon slipped into the room. He'd been pacing the hallway for over an hour. He looked pale. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally decided to put it down. He held out a small USB drive. "Everything you need is on that," he said. "I should have done this a long time ago. I'm sorry, Emma. I'm so sorry." He left before I could say anything. What was on that drive became the foundation of everything that followed. Emails between Derek and Patricia going back 8 months, planning, strategizing, coordinating with Gerald Holt. Communications that showed the custody arrangement was never meant to be temporary. It was meant to be permanent. The goal was to pressure me into signing away my parental rights in exchange for a financial settlement that had been quietly set aside in an account I knew nothing about. They had decided, before Rose was even born, that I was not suitable, not educated enough, not wealthy enough, not the right kind of woman for the Calloway name. And rather than Derek simply asking for a divorce, which would have been painful but honest, they had built an elaborate, calculated plan to take my daughter from me. Carol helped me find a real attorney. Gerald Holt faced a complaint with the State Bar. Patricia Calloway's history with her first daughter-in-law became relevant suddenly to a great many people. The plan fell apart completely. Derek filed for divorce through proper channels. I received primary custody of Rose. The financial settlement wasn't lavish, but it was enough. Enough to go home, enough to start over, enough to breathe. I went back to Ohio, to my grandmother's house. I put Rose in the little room where I used to sleep as a girl, the one with the yellow curtains and the view of the yard. I stood in that kitchen making coffee on a Tuesday morning, and I thought, I am still standing. After all of that, I am still standing. People ask me if I'm angry. I am. I won't pretend I'm not. There are nights when I think about that hospital room and the sheer cruelty of it, the calculation, the timing, the way they had looked at my newborn daughter and seen only an asset to be managed, and I feel something that burns so hot it has no clean name. But mostly I feel grateful. Grateful for a nurse who was 53 years old and remembered a name, who had carried a stranger's story with her for decades and used it to protect me in the middle of the night. Marge Holloway did not have to do what she did. Nobody was going to grade her on it. She just did it, quietly and without hesitation, because it was right. Grateful for Brandon, who chose his conscience over his family when it would have been much easier to look the other way. Grateful for Carol, who walked into my room at midnight like she had been sent. I think often about the woman Marge told me about, the first one. The one who had no Marge, the one who signed something in a hospital room and spent years trying to undo it. I don't know her name. I don't know how her story ended, but I carry her with me. She is part of why I am telling you this. If you are ever in a room where someone hands you papers and tells you to sign, and your gut tells you something is wrong, trust your gut. You're allowed to say, not yet. You're allowed to say, I need to read this first. You are allowed to say, I want my own lawyer present. You are allowed to say no. Exhaustion is not consent. Fear is not consent. Being alone and overwhelmed and not knowing your rights is not consent. Rose is 2 years old now. She has her father's eyes, which I have made my peace with, and my grandmother's stubbornness, which I am entirely proud of. She laughs at everything. She is fearless in the way that only people who have always been loved can be fearless. I think she is going to be okay. I think we both are.